kind of shocks at first, but then you get a lot of nods from people, is this idea that the larger the number of older brothers that a male has, the higher the probability that he is gay.
It's been seen over and over. I mean, it's really one of the rock solid findings in human sexuality that was first noticed by Ray Blanchard at Toronto and has been seen in many populations all over the world. So the way to emphasize the difference is if a baby boy is born today,
that sounds like a throwaway statistic, but it isn't. It's one piece of a much bigger, stranger story about hormones, brain development, attraction, and the possibility that some of the most intimate parts of who we become may begin long before memory, language, or choice. Dr. Mark Breedlove has spent decades studying how hormones shape the brain. And in this conversation, he walks through some of the strongest biological findings in human sexuality, carefully, cautiously, and without pretending the science is simpler than it is. This is Synthesize, where we turn long podcast conversations into their most important ideas. The conversation begins with something disarmingly human, a first crush. Not a theory, not a political argument, just the strange fact that attraction often arrives before we understand what attraction even is.
Influence sexual orientation, independent of behavior.
We need to step back a little bit for the context. One thing that your listeners might not know is, in the year 2000, there was still a lot of people who regarded same-sex orientation as a choice, a lifestyle choice. That was the political combination of words that meant you could disapprove of people because they were attracted to the same sex. Of course, I'm at Berkeley. I didn't have any truck with such notions at all. And I've always been convinced that sexual orientation is not a choice. And there's
That matters because it reframes the whole documentary. Breedlove is not starting from ideology. He's starting from lived experience. Most people don't remember deciding what kind of person would move them. They discover it. The science comes later, trying to explain what the person already felt. For years, even Breedlove suspected social learning might explain most of this. Human childhood is long, human culture is loud. So what changed his mind? A bizarre result involving the ear.
Since the sex difference is present at birth, it might reflect prenatal testosterone. And so he measured the otoacoustic emissions in straight men and gay men and straight women and lesbians. And he reports that compared to straight women, the lesbians have fewer of these otoacoustic emissions than straight women. It's like, well, what? How would that happen? I couldn't think of any way to explain that except that, well, the lesbian might have been exposed to more prenatal testosterone.
This is the first big turn. The clue isn't behavior. It isn't parenting. It isn't identity language. It's a trait present at birth. That doesn't solve the mystery, but it does move the center of gravity backward, toward prenatal development, where the body and brain are being organized before anyone has a social life at all. Then the argument gets sharper, because even if hormones matter, the real question may not be how much testosterone is present. It may be what the brain does with it.
Totally masculine. So how would that work? That they were underandrogenized and yet they have all these sex differences in sexual attitude. I think the difference between gay and straight men isn't in how much prenatal testosterone they got. I think it's in how their brains responded to the testosterone that they got. And we can talk about that some more later. But back to the digit ratios, the lesbians had more masculine digit ratios than the straight women on average. And as you say, that's been replicated by many different labs. Dave puts it at...
That's a profound distinction. Biology is not just about dosage. It's also about sensitivity. Two people can be exposed to similar signals and still develop differently because the tissue receiving those signals responds differently. In plain language, the message may be the same, but the listener may not be. This is where the conversation moves from clues in the body to clues in the brain. One tiny region in the hypothalamus became one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire field.
that may or may not be the same as the SDNPOA, but is larger in men than in women. And what he found was that the nucleus in gay men was smaller than in straight men, and in fact, not significantly different from the size of the nucleus in women.
So it wasn't hyper male like the finger length ratio was?
No. In that case, it indicated either less androgen exposure or less of a response to the androgen that was there. And Simon got even more of an uproar than I did, published his paper in Science, and there were lots of people that were very...
This finding matters not because it proves everything, but because it narrows the map. It suggests that orientation is not floating somewhere in abstraction. It may involve real developmental differences in real neural tissue. But even here, the scientists are careful. A difference observed in adulthood does not automatically reveal what caused it. Then the episode hits its tonal pivot, because just as the science risks becoming abstract again, the conversation gives you something impossible to forget: sheep.
And he never mounts a female. In some cases, they'll have one of these, I'm going to call them gay rams. I think they have an orientation. He'll put this gay ram where there's a dozen females, and he might be in that paddock for 12 hours and never mount a single female.
Highly unusual for male rams.
And these are not typical rams. It's like a small percentage of the population. And I don't know how to explain that. I mean, you would think that these gay rams, that, well, an ejaculation is an ejaculation, right? An orgasm is an orgasm. I presume they have you would think that at some point, there's nothing.
This is the kind of moment that changes retention because it turns theory into image, not a metaphor, an observable pattern. A male animal with available females, no social pressure, no human culture layered on top, and still a stable partner preference. That does not make humans simple, but it makes pure social explanation harder to defend. Midway through, the conversation becomes more unsettling. Because partner preference may not just be about what we want, it may also involve what feels fundamentally wrong to us.
I think there's also at least the possibility that there's a biological component to it. And I think that's what Chuck was getting at, in that here's this difference in the brain. He doesn't know when the difference happened in the preoptic areas, but it seems to correlate with this idea that maybe these gay rams, no, they're not interested in having sex with her. They're, only...
It's aversive to them.
It's aversive, yeah. There's no other way to... I don't know any other way to explain how they choose never once mount a female.
Yeah, I feel like this
is one of the deepest ideas in the whole interview. We often talk about desire as if that's the whole system. But desire may have an opposite pole. Not just attraction to one thing, but non-attraction, or even aversion to another. That makes orientation feel less like a single dial and more like a set of push-pull circuits. Then Breedlove turns to one of the clearest human examples in the discussion: congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH. It doesn't offer a perfect answer, but it does show what happens when prenatal androgen exposure is unusually high.
These are females who were exposed to more testosterone than other females. So does that mean that they're going to be attracted to women when they grow up? And the answer is, well, interestingly, if you look at groups of women with CAH, they are more likely to be same-sex attracted, to be lesbians, than the population at large. But most of them are straight. But what's interesting about that is the older they get, as you keep surveying them, the higher the percentage of them that report having a lesbian orientation. So it's possible, first of all, that indicates that...
This is the kind of result honest science loves and lazy storytelling hates, because it's suggestive without being absolute. The pattern shifts, the odds move, but the outcome is not mechanically determined. That's often what real biology looks like: influence, not destiny. And just when the story starts sounding clean, another condition complicates it again: androgen insensitivity syndrome, or AIS.
Stop sending signals to the testes now. In these cases, you can ask, well, what's the sexual orientation of these women? And the vast majority of them grow up to be straight. They are attracted to men. And they're often very interested in having a family. And of course, they can't carry children themselves, but they can, adopt and things like that. And so they're very much feminine, very straight women.
But they're XY.
But they're XY. So the question is, and unfortunately, in terms of understanding whether prenatal testosterone alters our sexual orientation, these individuals.
This is why the documentary can't collapse into a slogan. If testosterone matters, AIS reminds us that receptors matter too. Socialization may matter too. Developmental timing may matter too. Every strong clue in this field seems to come with a warning label. Yes, biology matters. No, it is not the whole picture in one sentence. Late in the episode, the conversation arrives at the finding that opened this video: the older brother effect. Not because it explains all of sexual orientation, but because it is one of the strongest repeated patterns in the literature.
Kind of shocks at first, but then you get a lot of nods from people, is this idea that the larger the number of older brothers that a male has, the higher the probability that he is gay.
It's been seen over and over. I mean, it's really one of the rock solid findings in human sexuality that was first noticed by Ray Blanchard at Toronto and has been seen in many populations all over the world. So the way to emphasize the difference is if a baby boy is born today,
the power of this result is not that it predicts any one person. It doesn't. Most men with older brothers are straight, but at the population level, the pattern keeps showing up. And whenever a result survives across studies, countries, and decades, it forces the field to ask a harder question. What mechanism could possibly remember prior pregnancies? This is where the interview becomes almost cinematic, because the proposed mechanism sounds like science fiction until you hear it laid out slowly.
Some genes that her immune system has never seen before. All the genes on the Y chromosome, there's no way her immune system could have seen it. And as long as that first son is in utero, her immune system never sees it. But inevitably at birth, whether it's cesarean section or vaginal delivery, there's always blood and there's always mixing of blood. And so at that point, the mother's immune system is going to see these male-specific antigens that it's never seen before. Of course, it's going to regard it as an invader, and it's going to start making antibodies to it. So their hypothesis is that each time a woman.
That's the maternal immunization hypothesis. The mother's body may retain a biological memory of carrying sons before, not memory in the emotional sense, memory in the immune sense. A record written into antibodies. Again, not a total explanation, but suddenly the older brother effect is no longer just a weird statistic. It has a possible pathway. And after all of that, the conversation does something important. It circles back to the claim people have made for generations, that parenting style, missing fathers, or the wrong childhood activities can produce orientation.
Well, and of course, there's no doubt that the younger brain is more plastic. I mean, there's no way around that. But in terms of what one can do, there are limits. And in terms of sexual orientation, I can tell you, people look really hard for any social correlates. You talked earlier about the dad that's missing, or even Freud talked about the overly coddling mother and the dismissive father. That might make a boy more likely to be gay. And so people have looked for those sorts of correlates. The data.
This is one of the clearest takeaways in the episode. Scientists looked for those social explanations. Hard, and the strong evidence never really arrived. Culture can shape expression, comfort, language, and permission. But the blunt old story that you can socially engineer orientation in some simple way keeps running into the same problem: the data. The final movement of the conversation steps away from orientation and back toward the person trying to understand it. And that turn matters because it reminds you what science really is. Not certainty, but appetite.
Having a great time. And that's when I learned about neuroscience. So first, someone told me, oh, look at this course about comparative psychology. What's comparative psychology? It means comparing across species. And, oh, I didn't know psychologists studied animal behavior. And then pretty soon, I took a class Linda Uphouse taught, a physiological psychologist taught neuroscience, and I'm hooked, right? I mean, I love this stuff.
I mean, it's been an amazing art.
That may be the most important emotional note in the whole documentary. This field is messy, politically charged, and easy to distort. But underneath it is a scientist who kept following the questions that felt too interesting to leave alone. And maybe that's the right ending for a subject like this. Not certainty, but curiosity with discipline. So what should we take from all of this? First, sexual orientation does not look like a simple choice. The strongest parts of the conversation keep pushing the story earlier into prenatal development, hormone exposure, receptor sensitivity, immune signaling, and brain organization. Second, biology matters without becoming destiny. Again and again, the evidence moves the odds without fully determining the outcome. That makes the science stronger, not weaker, because reality is usually probabilistic before it is absolute. Third, the honest story is more complicated than either side usually wants. Social explanations alone look weak, but biological explanations are not single-cause fairy tales either. They are layered, developmental, and unfinished. And maybe that's the real shift in how this episode changes your thinking. The deepest parts of who we are may begin before memory, but they still resist being reduced to a slogan. If this kind of breakdown helps you think differently, you'll probably enjoy the next video too.